Fred, I'm really grateful for you joining me because you always show up at very short notice when I email you, and yet with great enthusiasm and great um, motivation to get the message across about economic reform and how we can achieve a better society for everybody. And you know, this reach out to you really was to discuss a number of subjects within the context of the land cycle, which is what I write about. So, you know, it was really to sort of to give my subscribers an update on the land cycle, because that's why they subscribe to me. They want to know about the boom and the bust and the timing of it. But always, I emphasize in everything that I write and everything that I advocate that the only way that you can even understand the land cycle and understand the gravity and the importance of it, because it is really the most important economic cycle that there is. And that was established by some of the great minds, such as Edward Dewey, who was the founder for the Foundation for the Study of Cycles and did a tremendous amount of research on all sorts of cycles. But he still said the 18-year cycle is probably one of the most important economic clocks that we have. And the reason it's so important, of course, is because of everything that is advocated within the Georgist paradigm, what we talk about in Georgism, but of course that's just a label for it. It was something that was recognized, I think, way before that, and that is that land sits at the base of the economy. But before we get into all of this, because I know there's a lot to discuss, let's start off with the question about the land cycle, because we really are in the final phase of it now. And this land cycle has played out a little bit differently to how previous ones have played out, in so much as we had a pandemic for the midpoint recession of this land cycle, which did shift things quite dramatically in terms of what happened to inflation and what happened to lending rates, and also what happened to different patterns of migration. I know what it's done to Australia. Why don't you launch off with what you're seeing there in England, because you're following it very closely yourself?
Well, the one essential difference between this cycle and the profiles of the previous cycles, in my view, is that the last 2 years that should be characterized by a zooming upward scaling of the prices of land hasn't conformed to what we see in previous cycles. But it's not that it's absent, it's that we banked that profile, the upward surge in land values, during the COVID epidemic years. That's when the cycle experienced a upward surge that was premature. But it was the consequence of all the money that governments poured into their economies. So it's not that the cycle, it doesn't conform to its previous behavior. It's just that we've banked the final 2 years worth of upward capital gains just a little bit earlier than normal. That's the essential difference in the cycle. Otherwise, governments are behaving exactly as they always do, pouring more money into property, ostensibly to make it easier for people to acquire homes. They are deregulating the financial sector, again, ostensibly to make it easier for investment in productive activities. But all of that activity actually renders the system increasingly vulnerable, fragile. And when the crash comes, they're all shocked. It's a repetitive phenomenon. And the question is, why doesn't the historical experience leave its impression on the policymakers? Because it doesn't. They keep repeating the same mistakes.
Mm, mm. That's exactly how I've seen it in Australia as well. I mean, we had such a rapid and sudden rise in rates after the COVID boom in prices, following the pandemic and the stimulus payments that flowed from that, that we sort of had like, I would say, in our medium prices, like a mini crash in medium prices through 2023. And of course, now they're taking off, and it's very patchy. I can look at Brisbane and look at Perth, and they've had very strong results, and even Adelaide, whereas Melbourne and Sydney have been a little bit more muted. And I would imagine that it's been similar in the UK. Have prices there inflated enough to produce the type of dramatic downturn that you would get in prices at the end of the cycle? Are we still on a trajectory for seeing, um, the sort of collapse in the UK that we saw in 2008?
The answer is yes, but some of the detail is different. One of the essential differences this time is that the surge in the prices is happening in the regions. And again, this is a consequence of COVID. People moved out of London, and so they started jacking up the prices of the Cotswolds and the North, where they felt secure, where they could particularly get into London for a couple of days in the office and then go back home into the countryside. So we're seeing the weakening of prices in London, or not, yeah, the weakening in the sense that they're not going up as fast as one would have expected, but they're going up much faster elsewhere in the UK. Part of the reason, of course, is fiscal policy. This government, the Labour Party government, has decided to penalise very rich people, some of whom are uprooting themselves and quitting Britain. So that has weakened the central London property prices. But none of this alters the profile, the upward trend. It's just that the beneficiaries are those who own properties outside London. Otherwise, it's still the same story.
Mm. Well, let's talk a little bit, because I was researching, just Googling around, really. It's more than researching, before, the interview started, because obviously it's quite late at night for me, and it's in the morning there in the UK. And I was having a look and seeing if you'd done any sort of recent news interviews. And I came across this article which talked about the top 20 economists in the UK, and it had you as number 20, and it didn't mention anything about the cycle. But I thought, oh, that's quite interesting, because they've got you up there. So that's good. We've actually got a proper economist in the top 20 economists in the UK. But, you obviously have a lot of prestige there, and you've written so many books, and the early books, of course, that most of my subscribers will be familiar with is The Power in the Land, which you wrote in 1983, which called this downturn that was going to happen, the end of the business cycle was going to happen in 1992. And then, of course, you wrote books such as The Chaos Makers, which then forecast that we were going, years in advance, 10 years in advance or so, that we were going to have this dramatic downturn in the business cycle that would see a peak in prices in 2007, a downturn into 2008, and then a bottoming in 2010. And, as part of the tremendous publicity that you've gathered through promoting the cycle, which I think has been a very good thing in terms of Georgist advocacy, the politicians have utterly, utterly ignored it. Now, I know my reasoning for why that would be, but I'm interested in how you've viewed that, as to all of this work that I've put in, and nobody has heard the message or changed anything. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, my view can't be different from yours because there's only one explanation. Um, uh, we're we're all invested in making capital gains out of our assets, main asset, which is our home. And so we don't want to spoil that prospect of being able to cash in one day, and if not for ourselves, then for our children. Um, well, okay, but that's still not enough of an account of why we live in a society that claims to be science-based, where a post-enlightenment freedom of expression, democratic values, all of which count for nothing when it comes to the one vital issue that has existential implications. And so the problem is that despite all the effort that people like me have made over the last 5 generations, we really have only been scratching the surface of what's been going on. And given that that's the reality, and I don't want to check out from this world having left the next generation in the same situation that I found myself in 50 years ago, I'm having to burrow as deep as I can into why have we switched off from the mechanism that contains the secret to the good life? Why is it that we keep nurturing the process that's actually the root of all evil? These are phrases that I normally don't like to use because they are sort of biblical concepts that don't actually pinpoint forensically exactly what we need to do. So that's what we need, this forensic examination of just why politicians can be told that. Let me give you an example. With the last government, which was Conservative, it looked as though the Labour Party would win the election. So I wrote to the lady who was expected to be the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and I said, look, you're better off losing the next election, because otherwise your party will be blamed for what's going to happen. Whereas the responsibility should fall on the party that's been in power for 14 years, which had the time to do something about it. Well, my letter to the lady who was going to be the next chancellor obviously fell on deaf ears, because she then was made head of the Treasury and has done precisely the opposite of what she should be doing. Now, why? And I can't put all the blame on the politicians. That I must have failed to inspire in some essential way, or provoke in some important way, the willingness to think deeper and confront the reality. So that's what I'm in the process of now doing. My next book, which I hope is out next January, will get to the utter basics of the whole issue. And that'll be the kind of legacy that I hope to leave, rather than the previous books, which were worthy publications for sure, but they used the language that actually worked against us. And language is something really important that the activists, the Georgist community needs to examine if we really want to penetrate this fog around the minds of policymakers that insulates them from reality.
Mm. I agree with your synopsis of that, about the law of capital gain, which I'm going to dig in a little bit with you in a moment. But the way that I've always seen it is a little bit on the flip side of that, especially sort of working with Prosper and working on the idea of lobbying government for taxation reform. And I know you don't like the word taxation when it comes to land tax, but of course it's a term that can be readily understood within the framework of the tax system that we have over here. And that is the difficulty in employing direct taxation. And it's something that our Victorian government has been doing over the past, few years, is that they have actively been shifting taxes onto land. We have a higher windfall gains tax. We have a higher land tax to pay back the COVID debt. They're now trying to tax the family home if you run a business from home. And on the other side of it, on the flip side, they have actually reduced some of the productivity taxes that they are responsible for. And I'm, sort of talking about business insurance taxes and payroll taxes. And that's, of course, what we're advocating at Prosper. But the actual pain of doing that on a population that has been breastfed on the notion that the way that they create wealth for their retirement is in an increasing land price is acutely painful when you start taxing land, because that means that your land tax bill goes from something that you're quite familiar with and begrudgingly accept to perhaps getting a $30,000 tax bill through the post or an $11,000 tax bill. And the result has been the desired result, which is that it completely, for a period of time, removed speculation from Melbourne's market, the city market, where speculation produces that increase in land values. And from doing that, a lot of investors decided that their capital gains weren't enough to offset the land tax bills that they were getting, so they started to sell. I don't know if those policies will survive the next state election, but I do know how it's felt to people on the ground, and it's not felt very nice because, of course, the one tax that you cannot evacuate yourself from is a land tax. You can't hide from it very easily. You can hide from your other taxes with expenses and whatever else that that your accountant is going to do. So I mean that was going to be my comment. I don't know, before I ask you the next question, whether you've got any reaction to that.
Look, we operate on the basis that ours is a reasonable world, but it's not a reasonable world. But we really think it is, and not until we initiate a conversation with the public, the masses, not with the politicians. They're a lost cause. We need to initiate a conversation that goes right to the root elements, whereby we can tell people to their faces, look, guys, you do not own the property that your house is sat on. They will say, but I've got a legal contract that says that I do. That's the kind of conversation that needs to be initiated. Yes, you own the right to locate your home on that site, but the whole population is working this year to produce a new stream of income, which we call rent, which you didn't contribute to, or you might have done if you're working as a salaried employee, but yours is 1/10 millionth of that rent or whatever it is. You're not producing the whole of that rent. It's not your property to then capitalize and sell in the property market. I know that this is the sort of detail that certainly the politicians don't want to get into, but unless we inspire that kind of conversation, we will always get the running after our own tails kind of conversation, and the use of words that actually backfire. For instance, politicians talking about the need for a wealth tax. Oh yeah, that's popular. We'll make the wealthy people pay their quote, fair share. Now, nobody knows what a fair share is. It just sounds good. And the wealth tax sounds good. But the fact that almost no action is taken on wealth taxes indicates there's something wrong with the notion of a wealth tax. But nobody says, oh, by the way, buried into the notion of a wealth tax is unearned and earned wealth. Oh, well, why are we taxing earned wealth when we should be focusing on the unearned wealth? But that conversation doesn't take place. So we can look at the detail of what governments are doing, the small changes, the small benefits, but it's all for nothing because, as you say, it gets unwound at the next election when the rhetoric returns to the safe ground for keeping people's minds muzzled by the confusions that reign in our world. Our world is pathologically disturbed, but for a good reason. It was designed that way. Well, these are the kind of issues that we need to burrow into and explain in language that people can understand, that makes sense, and that mobilizes the masses into saying, okay, sod it, let's get back to the root causes and benefits, and let's take the action that really needs to be taken.
Mm. And I think that that really is the vision of what Henry George was trying to convey when he wrote Progress and Poverty. And I come across a lot of people that are very new to Georgism. And again, a lot of this is through my lens of working with Prosper Australia, which is the oldest Henry George organization in the world, sort of set up, that's still going, sort of set up after Henry George came and did his tour of Australia and New Zealand, and was so inspiring to the masses. But a lot of people come and join Prosper because they're angry about high house prices. So they come and they feel like Prosper is all about affordable housing. It's an affordable housing party because we want affordable housing. And it irritates me in a sense because Georgism was so much more than that. And I think you've encapsulated it with what you've just said, because it was, in essence, it is a moral question of what belongs to you, what belongs to me, and what belongs to us. It's a recognition of the Commonwealth, and it doesn't necessarily, in its implementation, create affordable housing. What it does do is it creates a platform to enable people to live in a system that is more fair, is more equitable, and allows them then to have access to the sustenance of things that they need in order to thrive in life. Where at the moment, this split between rich and poor is all about land. So I'm curious, because this question comes up a lot when we have strategy days at Prosper, and we talk about our philosophies and what we want to achieve. And of course, whatever we want to achieve has to be within the policy framework of what policies, how can we achieve that within a current policy framework. But what is the vision in your mind of what Henry George was trying to do? Because it was more than affordable housing, wasn't it?
Well, first of all, remember, he was talking in terms of the 19th century. So his communications, the language he used, resonated with people in the 19th century. That language does not resonate with people today. The basic concept of a land value tax. In the 19th and early 20th century, most people didn't own their homes, so they were not vested in the idea of protecting property owners. Today, most people are property owners and they are vested in opposing a land value tax. And that's why I believe that we have to start by a re-examination of the language that we used. Henry George was talking about transforming society. Well, exactly what bits was he wanting to transform? The property market, uh, governance in terms of the way it raised its revenue. So it wasn't a wholesale Marxist shift of everything. It was just forensically identifying precisely what needed to be done to deliver what people said they really wanted, which was the freedom to act according to what was their best interests, but their best interests, which included their social interests. People knew then, and they know now, that they can't be just individuals. We are social creatures. But the language that resonated in the 19th century doesn't in the 21st century. So those who advocate a land value tax are shooting themselves in the foot the instant they refer to the word tax, because taxes are arbitrary, discriminatory levies on one's earned incomes. So why the hell should I agree with you and this land value tax? I don't want to know. Forget it. I'm going to switch off. And they switch off. And the politician understands that and doesn't want to get involved. So we have to ask ourselves, well, if Henry George was around today, how would he present the case for this radical revision to the social system? And he wouldn't be using I believe anyway, the language that he used back then, and which 5 generations of activists have continued to use without a critical linguistic analysis. So that's what one of my missions coming up to next year. We have to start looking at the concepts that we use and reformulate them in terms that empathizes with people's ordinary sensibilities, so that we can engage in a conversation with them, so that when we talk about what is fair and what is not fair, we're actually specifying something specific, not some airy-fairy notion of what is fair and what isn't fair, which means that the politicians can do nothing, because you can't write a piece of legislation saying we will have a fair tax regime, go away and collect the revenue from a fair tax. What the heck does that mean? It means nothing. And that's why this pathological system of property rights, which we have, gets away with it. We are actually enabling the system by not embarrassing it, by exposing it with the language that resonates with the people in the street.
Mm. I agree with you. I think language is very important, and perhaps we're living in an age where that is more recognized than ever, with the overreach of political correctness and what we are allowed to say and what we're not allowed to say. And of course, we don't put the same emphasis on it when it comes to economics and how we convey the economic message. I think perhaps one of the most important things when understanding why we're so passionate about what we talk about is the importance of locational advantage. And I see it every day in the work that I do working in the real estate market, because I have to do acute analysis on what makes land values rise, and I have to witness it and to learn from what I can see on the ground when I'm walking around the streets. But I think that when you talk about locational advantage, there's all sorts of stories you can throw at it as to, you can earn a higher income here than you can if you were living here. And, if you're living here, you've got access to walk down the beach. And if you're living here, you don't have access to that, and that might impact your stress levels. But I think the most powerful story of this that you put forward in your book, and you're not the only one that I've read this type of analysis from. It's just that you are the only one that has been able to link it to what the actual cause of it is. I have read it from medical people that have spoken about the differences in how long you live. But that's the core of what you were talking about, which is if you live in London, you're going to live for, if you have a baby in London, even to more emotive language, that child is going to live longer than if you're born in Scotland or in some, northern region of the UK. And what a powerful narrative that is. Can you explain what the research was behind that you did and why that would be? Explain to people why you would live longer in London than you would in the north.
Well, the case I am citing in my next book is Blackpool compared with the London borough I live in. I went to school for 6 months in Blackpool as a young person. My family was lodged by the army in one of the guest houses. We were in transit on our way to Singapore from Germany. So I went to school, and looking back, all the young kids that I went to school with are dead today because the life expectancy of people in Blackpool is 14 years less than those who are raised in the borough where I live in London. What's the difference? Just to pose that question to people. Why is it that my contemporaries in Blackpool are all dead and I'm still alive? We are biologically the same. We're exposed to the same air. We eat the same food. And yet, uh, they're all dead and I'm not. And statistically, it has to be explained in terms of the quality of the lives. But it's not good enough for the politicians then to say, oh, well, we'll spend more money in Blackpool to create a few more factories, which is their get out way of dealing with this problem. We're talking about a fundamental bias. And there's only one explanation: the net revenue that's generated in the regions is sucked into London. The rents that they all create, which should be spent on the social infrastructure of their communities, ends up in the City of London and pushing up house prices within commuting distance of the City of London, which means that we lead quality lives in London. We have more theatres to go to and all the rest of it, compared with if you're in a back street in Blackpool where kids have no prospects. And it's only by equalizing that tragedy that we can now emancipate people in the regions to live as long a life as those enjoyed by people who live in London boroughs like the one I live in. This is what we should be talking about rather than house prices and affordable housing and so on. Is it fair? Now the word fair can come into play. Is it fair that if you're born in Blackpool, you're almost certainly going to retire and then die? Whereas me, because I'm raised or live in a London borough, I get to enjoy old age, and it's subsidized by you idiots up north whose taxes are channeled into the infrastructure in London, in and around London. Is that fair? Well, of course it's not fair. Okay, well, explain it. Explain the financing of it. Is it that you guys are not productive up north? No, your wages are no lower than the wages of the guys in London. Across the country, the take-home pay after tax and after paying your mortgage are the same. People are as productive up north as in London. The difference is this net income is higher in London because of what's called agglomeration. Okay, But that's not to do with the individual and his wages. It's to do with the way we've arranged our system. We generate more rents in London, but only because we've got the people up north willing to buy the goods from London, who are willing to send their educated people to work in London. We all share this additional net income. It ought to be equalized across the country. Oh, well, yeah, that sounds fair. Well, that's the sort of narrative that we should be engaging in, because then people start to say, well, but why isn't Parliament doing something about it? Well, then they will say, well, look, Parliament did say we should send money that's created in London and spread it across the country. Now, the right-wing press take, using their language, take that fact and say, see, we give a lot more to the rest than we even spend in London. We're not giving it away. The people in the north are entitled to a fair share of what is communally produced. It's got nothing to do with Londoners being generous to the rest of the country by handing out these subsidies up to the people up north. The whole context of the discussion needs to shift and shift away. See, the concept of land. We say it's a land value tax. Well, land refers to nature, but the revenue that we're talking about is, yes, some of it is the result of nature. If you live in Blackpool, some of the location values is a result of being by the sea, where people can enjoy swimming off the beach. So, yeah, we can attribute part of rent to nature, but most of it is location values attributable to social assets. Uh, well, why is it different? Why make an issue of this? Because land wasn't created by me or you, so in a sense it's neutral. It's up for grabs. The first come, first served. Uh, but if you switch it to, well, we're talking about location values. Oh, well, the locations are the assets that we all create. So, and please let me illustrate this with an example. If you live around a school that is designated as high achieving, then the property prices are much higher. In fact, the average in the UK is shown to be 119 or so £1,000 more, just because it's close to a high achieving school. Well, people are willing to pay that extra to be close to a school that's designated as high achieving, so they can send their kids to it. But why are they paying that 119,000 extra capital gain to property owners in the area when it's actually the school that's created that value? So if we say, is it fair that if you want to move into this location, you've got to, the entry fee is charged not by the school, which is fair enough. Parents are willing to pay more for the education of their children. No, you're paying it to somebody who's got nothing to do with the school. Oh, well, that's not fair. Now the conversation again is at the level of the human impact. It's not the land, it's the location that matters. And so the discourse is elevated to something more precise and personal. And now people can get angry and they can say, yes, I'm willing to pay this money, but I'm willing to pay it to support the school. Oh, well, you've got to pay it through the public sector. It's not a tax, it's your willing contribution. So now we need a word other than tax to the public purse that funds the school that you want to send your kids to. Well, yeah, I'm willing to go for that. Why should I be paying a property owner for something that they actually didn't? So now we have a nuanced conversation, and it gets to the emotive issues that resonate with people, and there's more chance of getting support for the advocacy of fiscal reform.
Yes, I think that you've encapsulated it extremely well, because that is the core of what Georgism is. It is about recognizing that a system is fundamentally unjust. And nobody likes the idea, well, most people, I would say, don't like the idea of being unjust, because it's not a natural state for us to be in. It's not a nice feeling when you feel that you're unjust. It's not a nice feeling where you feel that you've cheated somebody. And it's about understanding that the system that we live in, which is advocated to being very just, that we pay our taxes and our taxes fund these facilities, is just consistently causing this divide and this shortness of life. And because it makes people angry, and it reminds me of a story, and this was a story that was told to me just last night. I had a friend over who came over to see me last night, and he was talking about the astronauts that were stuck on the space station for however many long days that they were stuck there until they were rescued and brought back down. And he said that one of the astronauts was relaying this story about how he looked at the Earth and he could see that I don't know an awful lot about global warming and climate change, but he could see that the ozone, or the atmosphere around the Earth, was thinning. He could see some problem with that. And in his mind, he said to himself, if only people would concentrate more on saving the planet than they would on economics. And my answer to him was, economics is the way to save the planet. The economics of Georgism is the answer to the problems, the core of the problems that we have. Because unless we have a mechanical way of organizing this, because we all need to go out, earn a living, make our money, provide for our families within the structures that we have to have a solution within the structures that we have to right the injustices which are producing the locational disadvantages that are producing the rampage of the planet and the monopolization of land. And indeed, you can extend that philosophy then to war. And we have so many regional wars that have broken out, which at their fundamental core are about land and about a fight over who owns territory. And unfortunately, it is that owns concept that produces those problems. So I'm very grateful for you sort of saying that, and I hope you don't mind me sort of expanding on it a little bit. But it's something that I think about all the time, being involved in policy reform in Australia, which is, let's stop talking about affordable housing and let's start talking about what the problem is. Because under Georgism, you're still going to have housing that is not affordable in certain areas of the country for people, but it's about writing that injustice in a way that can it makes it a more equal system. But the other thing that I was going to ask you about was, we talk a lot about this, it's more about, I guess, about how we got here and why people can't see this economic system. Why can't they see what's wrong with economics? Now, you've written an awful lot about this, from the book that you wrote with Mason Gaffney, the late and the very great Mason Gaffney. I should say that was, one of the best economists that we had for what we advocate, The Corruption of Economics, which I think everybody should read because it's such a compelling book. Can you expand on that and also talk about what it is that you see today that is the problem as to why people can't see the land?
You've asked me about the theme of my next book. uh, if people could understand economics, they wouldn't tolerate what's going on. So the simple answer to your question, Catherine, is that they're not supposed to understand what is going on. And we have been conditioned into not understanding. We are schooled into blinkering our minds on certain issues. So we use words like freedom Oh yeah, but and then there's then the everything shuts down if you dare to enter into the realm of property rights. Um, it's as simple as that. You are not supposed to understand what is going on. So when people say, but what we want is affordable housing, if you said to them, hang on, you can't have affordable housing. Oh, well, why not? Well, because if housing was affordable for everybody, then that would mean we've got some kind of a social justice system. And you can't have social justice. What do you mean we can't have social justice? That's our system. We are a society based on No, we're not. This system was calibrated, created to generate injustices so that people like you and me, existing homeowners, can get rich doing nothing, while the other poor sods who are laboring and they're paying rents just live in this limbo land where they're going to die many years before you and me because they're not enjoying life as much as we are. That's the system that we have. So it comes back to the simple answer that you're not supposed to know what's actually going on. And the words that we use camouflage the reality. An example is the word risk. There's no risk about what's going to happen over the next 2 or 3 years because we know what's going to happen. And that being the case, we could either prevent it from happening by amending legislation or anticipating it and defending ourselves against what's going to happen. So there's no real risk. But the risks exist because people aren't allowed to understand what is actually going to happen over the next 2 or 3 years. It comes as all as a shock, a surprise. Oh, I should have taken insurance out against it. No, you shouldn't. You should have stopped it happening. But you, all of you, are part of the problem. You don't want to know because you're homeowners. And therefore, you want to preserve this system of injustice. And short of spelling it out in 100,000 words, that's the explanation, Catherine. We are not supposed to know. We are the products of it's going back thousands of years, brainwashing in order to consider what is abnormal as normal. So getting on the property ladder is something to aspire to. The fact that getting on the property ladder means we are consolidating a system of injustice just doesn't enter into the conversation. But somebody has to begin that conversation, otherwise it will just perpetuate itself. And that's why language is one of the important starting points for the conversation. You don't know what you're talking about. Let's re-examine the words we're going to use and then come back to the practical issues of housing, for example, or employment, or opportunities for improving one's welfare. Uh, let's clear the debris out of the language that we've inherited, which actually closes our minds.
Mm. Of course, people do have that concept of getting on the mythological property ladder. And I know in this country, you know, I always say it's the tax system dictates how you invest. And unfortunately, the tax system is dictating to people where they should go in order to minimize their tax. And that happens to be still to go to land to enjoy the capital gain and the minimal tax back of that gain. And I understand totally what you're talking about in terms of language. It's a ongoing conversation here as well. But to sort of bring it back down to the land cycle, because that's really where we sort of start and where we finish. You know, you've made obviously predictions about where this cycle will finish. what we see in Australia is that we have a new federal government, and the federal government has come in with policies that are going to stimulate the property market, of course, from the lower end, from first home buyers, in so much as they're offering first home buyers from next year that they can purchase property with just a 5% deposit. And in many of the states, we have a situation where there's no stamp duty for first home buyers as well. So it's going to make property for a large proportion of people that don't own cheaper than renting, because we've had such inflation in rents. And the economics of that, you don't need to be an economist to understand that that's going to stimulate the property market, and in my mind probably give us a blow off into the final phases of the land cycle, as I call it. I don't know how it's going to play out in the end in the UK, but I would imagine that the government that you have there have stimulated the property market as well, and that it's all going to play out to plan. But then we're expecting this collapse. I suppose the first question would be, well, I asked you this at the beginning in regard to the timing, but your book, the timing of the release of your book would be along the lines of, let's get the book out so that when that collapse does come, we can talk about what needs to be done. I can educate on what needs to be done at the bottom in order to prevent another cycle forming. Is that accurate? Is that where we are with the motivation behind your book and the timing of it?
Not strictly. The end of this cycle is going to be different from all the previous ones, in that so many other things will come into play automatically. We're talking about a global cycle rather than individual countries having the land value cycle. And the economic crisis that will result from the current land cycle will feed into so many other things of existential consequence. So already governments are pulling back on the amount of money they're spending on the environmental crisis, for example. Well, when the proverbial stuff hits the fan, they'll reduce the amount of money that they're devoting and the policy focus on the environmental crisis, which means we got an even worse environmental crisis. China says that in 2027, it's going to have a war with Taiwan. That's going to feed into the general chaos, supply chains and so on, affecting economies around the world. Well, if China really can't get out of its property cycle, and it's deeply into a crisis now already, then for nationalistic reasons, a war with Taiwan will serve a purpose of keeping control of the population in their own homeland. But it'll also involve the rest of the world. And Putin will still be fighting Ukraine. The autocrats will rise because the people will be dissatisfied with unemployment levels and so on. So we have a convergence of multiple existential crises at the end of this cycle. And so we can't assume that, oh, after a couple or 3 years and government spending more money, we start a new cycle. No, because we are now locked into the convergence of its four existential threats, one of them being political paralysis. That paralysis, for example, in 2008-10 resulted in, oh, well, the banks can lend us all the money we need, and if we then push the costs onto the people, we may have 10 years of austerity, but that'll see us through the problem of the banking crisis and so on of 2008-10. But this time, it's not the banks that will be too big to fail. It'll be the governments that are too big to fail, But who's going to bail out the banks? The lenders will say, but we can't get insurance if we lend the money to the banks to bail them out. So we're not going to bail out the governments. What chaos are we going to be locked into? It's a horror story, and one has to confront it, because the only way that we can hope to navigate our way through that kind of chaos is where the mass of the people have some vision of justice and efficiency, of being equipped to rebuild after the chaos. And the only doctrine that can deliver that is the one that Henry George sailed to Australia and New Zealand to spread, and which is still around today, to be the savior of the world, if people could only understand what the hell it means. So
Mm.
the work of people like you, Catherine, is vital in making people understand that they've no choice but to come to grips with the fiscal reform that will that becomes the savior in the face of all these existential threats.
And you were one of the first, Fred. I wrote about this probably a couple of reports ago. I can't remember because I write every week. I get mixed up as to where I've been writing things. But you were one of the first that I know of to be forecasting World War III. You've got a YouTube on your YouTube channel. You've kind of combined a series of videos where you were talking about war. And I remember you saying in one of the narrative of one of those videos that it was not just about forecasting that war, but it was about the timing, understanding the timing of when that would happen. And could it
Mm.
be that at the end of this cycle that we would see that world war? Um,
Yeah,
because it's not hard to forecast World War III. It comes after World War II, right? And at some point in history, we're going to have a world war. We can't rule that out. That's just going to happen. It's historically happened. It's going to happen again. But the timing and the land cycle really gives that timing, doesn't it? Because of the nature of the land cycle. So I'm assuming that your comment there regarding China and a potential invasion of Taiwan would be falling in with your analysis still, that we are facing a potential world war at the end of this cycle.
yes. And world wars always have their antecedents, and we've got that in the Middle East and Gaza. We've got it in Eastern Europe with Ukraine. These are all early elements that will converge. The only reason why governments are somehow able to pretend to be stable is that, well, they can still go about business as usual. But when the land cycle brings everything to a halt, that's when everybody panics. That's when nobody controls events. And as I say, governments themselves will be the institutions that are deemed to be too big to fail. Last time it was just the banks. Oh, we can rescue the banks, but who is going to rescue the governments? Nobody. Well, in that case, it's a free for all. In that case, it's chaos. And yeah, it's the convergence of all these apparently disparate elements on the one time zone at the end of this cycle, I fear.
Mm. And so you would still be forecasting the downturn then to occur. I mean, if you're saying, we're going to have a peak in land prices in 2026, that downturn would be 2027. Is that your forecast?
Yeah, we see the weakening, the paralysis, the stalling, and then the downturn, uh, and provoking so many other things. One of the difficulties, of course, is that uh, the wise guys in the media will be attributing these events to fringe things. Oh, well, it's Putin in Moscow that's created the chaos. Oh, well, it's President Xi in China. No, the root cause of all these elements is the pricing system. And we need to explain what that means. It's the pricing system that's created the environmental crisis. It's the pricing system that's given the autocrats the capacity to uh, dumb down the audiences so that they elect people like Trump. Uh, it's the pricing system. Well, what the heck does that mean? Okay, let's talk about pricing and where that leads to in language that people can understand so that now they have a vision of the future so that instead of the chaos creating more chaos, panic, which is really bad, when everything begins to crumble, we need to keep control of our minds, in effect, confident that actually we will be able to rebuild after the chaos. But for that, there needs to be a vision, a strong, a powerful vision, a plausible one that persuades people that all is not lost. Let's not panic. Yes, whole coastal regions are being flooded out of existence and so on, burnt down, but we can rebuild. We have a formula. Well, what is that formula? How does it involve me? What do I need to do? These are the basic questions that people need to address on a mass scale. They're the biggest of questions, and it really needs people like you, Catherine, to begin to air them so that people realize it's not just a question of, oh, let's build a few more affordable homes and then everything will be tickety-boo, because it won't be.
Mm. I agree with you. I just have one final thought as you're talking, and that is that one of my things that I've been doing over the last few months, it's actually turning into more of a book than it is a paper because I keep adding to it, which might not make those that commissioned it so happy. But I have been writing a paper on the land cycle for the purposes of Australia, really, the focus on Australia, which is, this concept of explaining what the land cycle is, explaining what causes the land cycle, applying it to an Australian framework, and then making a forecast so that we can at least get that forecast out ahead of time and then build a policy framework around it for what happens when that forecast comes in to give some credibility to it just within Australia, for those people that haven't heard of the land cycle. And one of the challenges was from submitting a draft of this paper and explaining it as best as I could within all the explanation that we've had in our conversation today, was to giving it to somebody who had no concept and had never heard of the cycle before, who said, well, I don't think it fundamentally proves that land is the cause of the economic cycle. It's like, where's the chart, the one chart that is going to prove that it's land that causes it? Where is the one bit of science? And of course, a lot of what we talk about in Georgism is, we understand it, the idea that increases how important land is, because it is our one fundamental need, because everything around us is built from land. We work on it, sleep on it, eat from it, bury our dead in it. We can't survive without land. So it is the foundational cause of most of our issues when we produce a system that increases land prices. But what is it that you would use if someone said, well, just prove to me that land is the cause of this cycle? What is there a chart? Is there, what would you point towards for that proof?
Look, you've described the importance of land as it applies to chimpanzees, sparrows, whales, and so on. They all need land to survive. And in that sense, human beings, of course, are no different, except we are different. And it's the difference that really contains the answer. That's why the word land is a cruel double-edged thing. If we are saying we are no better or worse than tigers and lions and parakeets, because we all need land, well, then, yeah. But there's something missing from that conversation, isn't there? Because we're not like those creatures. We need something much more. Oh, well, what is that? Well, there's the beginnings of the conversation of what is it that differentiates us from other species. And the thing that differentiates us is not land, because that we have in common with other species. It's something else. And it comes back to this word location. What does the word location refer to? All the things we need, which we're now no longer funding properly. Oh, but why aren't we funding all these things that we need properly? Well, because of the property rights. Oh, what's wrong with the property rights? And off the conversation goes.
Mm, mm. Well, I'm deeply appreciative of your time, Fred. Um, and just before we finish, what is going to be the name of your book? Has it got a name? The title? Have you decided on the title?
Yeah, it's called Cheating, and the subtitle is The Human Project and Its Betrayal.
And it is due out in January.
I hope it's timed for January 20th, which is the first year of Donald Trump's premiership.
Yes.
And that's another subject for discussion closer to the time.
Well, hopefully we will have that discussion. That will be a very interesting one if it's got to do with Trump, and it will give a little bit more time for some of the policies that he has been talking about to play out as well, and also what's happening in world events. You know, with the wars and everything, will be so much closer then towards the peak of this cycle. So you know, we'll be able to analyze it a little bit better within the context of what we've spoken about today, also. But yeah, thank you so much, Fred. Always appreciate it, and encourage people to look up your work, share the
And
rents, the
and
website.
thank you for all the work that you're doing, Catherine. And yes, Australia is a good exemplar illustrator of what the heck's happening everywhere else. So good luck with your work.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We will talk again soon.